Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, we're going to be taking a look at the solitaire wargame, Scream, Aim, Fire, designed by Jay Kirkpatrick and published by Tiny Battle Publishing. This is, I have it set up here as you can see, a hex encounter game. It is solitaire. The Germans, are controlled by the game engine. You play as the Americans. This takes place in the European theater just during World War II, just after the D-Day landings. There's a series of scenarios that you'll run through. They start simple with just a few units, and then they grow from there. I've already done a tutorial playthrough, so I've done a recon, of course, as usual, right? And unbagging. You can check that out as well. I also have a tutorial playthrough that is uploaded already and published. So in this video will not have a huge in-depth overview. I will explain the game quick. However, the meat and potatoes of this will be the review, this video. So please check out that tutorial playthrough, which plays through the first scenario from beginning to end, if you'd like to see the game in action. So this overview and review will follow my usual format. So this is the introduction part. I will do the overview where I explain the counters, the map, cards, how the game works, and we'll dive into my pros and cons, and then wrap up with my final thoughts. So let's go ahead and dive into the overview. Alright, so like I mentioned in the introduction, Scream, Aim, Fire is a solitaire hex encounter game, and as you can see, it's a tactical level. We have infantry, we have tanks, we have mortars, and we have machine guns. You will play as the Americans, and your actions will be done through what's called an orders system. So every turn, every orders phase, you're going to go ahead and roll 5, possibly 6 dice, depending if you use an optional rule. Those dice, the numbers that come up, are going to determine what orders you can give your troops. It'll be things like if you have a sniper fire, which not all scenarios will have a sniper, not all scenarios will have a tank, etc. You covering fire? Are your tanks allowed to move and fire? Can your infantry move and fire? Mortar fire, etc. All those things are controlled by these order dice. If you're not some turns you're going to roll and you're going to have all kinds of fantastic orders you can give out, all useful. And sometimes you're going to go ahead and roll dice, and you can only be able to maybe issue 1 or 2 orders that actually you're able to take advantage of. So just part of the game system that limits you, and you never know exactly what you're going to be able to do each turn. A way to simulate, the fog of war, the problem with command and control, especially in this era, etc. As for the Germans, they're going to be controlled by a combination of the numbers on their units, on their actual chits here, the counters, and these action cards. So each turn, the German units that are on the board in the game during a scenario are generally going to be kind of generating new German units. They're going to show up in these red hex areas. Not every turn, but as needed. So if you eliminate a certain amount of them, and there's only a few Germans left on the board, usually more will appear. So you're kind of going to have these waves of German soldiers coming at you. Each of the German soldiers, depending on what they are, so infantry and veterans, and then you have machine guns, so you see MG42 team, and you have tanks. The tanks and the machine guns have very specific rules that, pretty easy, but very specific rules. The regular infantry are going to use these action cards. So for each infantry, 2 things. One, you can see there's a number in the top right. The number is going to match up, or should say possibly match up, with an American unit on the board. If it does, it's going to go after that unit. If it doesn't matter. Each turn for each of the German infantry, you're going to be flipping over an action card. These action cards are going to tell you, depending on the status of the German unit, if it's calm, alert, which there are chits for alert, and then for panic, calm, alert, or panicked, tell you exactly what action they're going to take. Some things may override it. For instance, it may be, it says to move, but if a German unit is adjacent to an American, he's going to attack it. He's going to do a fire action. He's not just going to move away or move around, or, that wouldn't really make sense. So there are some exceptions to the cards. You don't always follow exactly what the cards say, but for the most part, they're going to guide the actions of the Germans. Each of the scenarios, we're just going to have basically scenario goals. For instance, this right now is map 1, which you get 2 maps with the game, and you have 5 scenarios that come with the base game. In this setup here for the first scenario, you have an objective hex. It says objective in it. I have a German unit on there, but you can see it right here. And there is the morale and reserve score Up here, you can just barely make it out at the top. Starts at 0, goes up to, it looks like 80 in this first scenario, which is part of my tutorial playthrough, by the way, so you can go ahead and see it in action. You need to get at least 40 morale, and then the Americans, you need to hold the objective hex at the very end of a turn. If you meet both those requirements, you win the scenario. Now, there is more to how the special units work. And by special, I basically mean the non-infantry. For instance, the Americans have mortars. The mortars have unlimited range, and their line of sight, they can be targeting, or the targeting for their attack can be used either from the mortar or from your first lieutenant that you'll have on the board in each of the scenarios. Tanks are going to have very special rules of how they attack each other when they attack infantry. The game also features some chit pull when it comes to when you hit tanks. We're rolling to hit tanks. You're going to draw a chit to see. Bullseyes, obviously, mean you're going to hit. You have things like destroying them automatically, things like missing entirely. So I can't seem to pull one out right now, but they're in there. Then you roll, or you pull, not roll, you pull a chit for tank damage. So maybe a thing like, oh, bounced. Looks like your shot actually didn't do any damage. Or it may destroy the enemy tank, etc. There's also infantry damage chits that when you destroy an infantry, you go ahead and draw a chit for that. So you never know exactly what's going to happen, right? You're going to be fighting, you never know exactly, hey, I got a hit on that tank. Awesome. Well, it may not be wiped out. It may not even be damaged. Shot may have bounced off. I hit the infantry, but maybe didn't finish him off. And if you did, maybe only got a little bit of morale, or maybe got a lot of morale. It all depends. There's a little bit of variability and randomness in each of the actions that are taken. Believe that covers the basics of the game. Again, this isn't a super in-depth overview, but if you want to see the game in action, I have an entire tutorial playthrough. Go ahead and check that video out. Otherwise, I think we're going to jump into my pros and cons and final thoughts. Time for the pros and cons. As usual, start with my cons, the things I didn't really like, thought could have been done better, maybe changed, etc. And then we'll get into my pros, things I liked. So first off, there's a lot of randomness at times. Sometimes it's better. There's ways to mitigate the luck, mitigate the randomness, but sometimes it just kind of is what it is. Most egregious maybe is when you're rolling for German reinforcements. So that's called the enemy spotted check phase. So at the beginning of every American turn, there's going to be an enemy spotted check. If the Germans have 5 or less units, you're going to roll on a chart in the rule book, and then that's how the Germans are going to get reinforcement units around this red hex area, or orange or red. And you go ahead and spawn and then start coming towards you, right? Makes sense. A good system for an AI, for a solitaire game. But, so you roll, here's how it works. You roll a regular 1d6. The Germans can receive as little as 2 regular infantry if you roll a 1, so just 2 guys, right? But if you roll a 6, they're going to get 5 regular infantry and 4 veterans. So that's the difference between one die roll, right? A 1d6, you never know what's going to happen. Germans could get 2 units, or they get as many as 9 units. And honestly, usually the scenarios will start with just a few units on the board. The later scenarios start with more. But that means there's a huge range in the German strength during each play. Good for replayability, I guess, right? Because you never know exactly the strength you're going to be facing. But should one die roll have such a strong impact on the difficulty? I don't know. So maybe that could have been smoothed out a little bit, right? Maybe it shouldn't be such a huge curve, 2 to 9 units. All right, secondly, some issues with determining AI actions due to the hex-based system. So when it tells you, things like, right, move 1 hex, fire if in range, you're going to move a hex, and maybe you have a number in the top right, so you know specifically where that German is moving towards, right? Or if you're already adjacent, you're going to be attacking them, etc. But sometimes, say, this infantry here is kind of in the middle of nowhere. He's a little bit of a way. And what if it's an equal distance between the American units here? Well, where does he go? Does he move towards the objective? Does he move towards which one of these American units? Is he go for a tougher one? Is it random? You have to make those choices sometimes. The rulebook does have some things that tell you, priorities. But when you're moving, if you've got a dozen or more German units on the board, sometimes you kind of want to do it quick, right? You don't want to sit there and run through a priority list for every single German infantry to see exactly what it does. So because it doesn't tell you, because you kind of have to look up yourself, you just end up kind of making some best choices for the AI at times. The AI system is good, but it's not perfect. Combat. It's frequently low odds combat. What I mean by that is rolling to hit often has a low chance of success. You need to roll a minimum of 4 to hit any unit. And once you factor in terrain, which, you're seeing woods, you're seeing buildings. There's these cover cards for the Germans. You don't draw them for you draw them for the Germans. But they may get, +1 cover here, even just +1. Well, that adds an additional, a bunker, no fire, no cover down here, etc. You never know. It could be no cover, it could be +1, +2, or no fire at all. But the point is that once you factor in the terrain along with that minimum 2 hit of 4+ for even a regular infantry, that means that you often need to roll a 5 or a 6 to hit. In fact, a lot of times you'll need to roll a 6 because a natural 6, hits automatically. Now you get a couple advantageous modifiers. For instance, your veteran units, and theirs, by the way, but your veteran units get a +1. If you have your first lieutenant and any units stacked with him or adjacent, get another +1. So you could have up to +2 to hit. But again, if you're shooting, say, a veteran, or this MG42 team 5+, and he's in the woods, and you flip a cover card, and he has even just light cover, now you need a 6 or higher to hit. I mean, again, it's just so you have 1 in 6 odds of actually hitting them. So kind of low odds combat. So what happens is you end up with a lot of combat where it's kind of shooting back and forth, and no one's hitting anybody. And finally, there's only 5 scenarios in the base game. Maybe could have been a few more. The rulebook's pretty short. I think he probably could have fit some more in there. And the scenarios themselves are kind of generic. They're setups, and you see some setup stuff on the map, and it'll tell you exactly where to put units. Well, you have these 5 scenarios. It'll be kind of basic. It'll say, like, go out into the countryside. And there's no, like, really backstory. There's nothing, it's not tied into a historical battle, which is fine, right? You could just do kind of generic scenarios, but maybe a little bit more backstory, a little bit more incentive, a little bit of things listed, like, okay, exactly what's going on here, to kind of get you more into the game and into that scenario. Not to mention maybe a few more than 5. I don't know. It's not the end of the world, because you do get a nice, good range from pretty simple, just a few units, to a whole bunch of units towards the, like, last scenarios. But the nice thing is that the designer, Jay Kirkpatrick, has already said that he's designing new scenarios. So whether those will be available for download in an expansion, both, I don't know. But definitely some new scenarios I think is appreciated. But he's already on it, so good for him. All right, let's jump into my pros. First off, components are excellent. Yes, the maps are paper. You're going to get paper maps. You get 2 paper maps with the game. They're not double-sided or anything, so it's just basically 2 different sort of setups. And not 2 scenarios, 5 scenarios come with the game, but 2 different setups where, let's say the terrain is, things like that. And I don't usually talk about price in my reviews, since the price, I really never talk about price in my reviews. And the reason is, I'll explain quick, because you never know how a person's getting a game. First of all, are they buying it in the country it was printed in? Is this, you're an American buying a game that's published by an American publisher? Are you an American getting it from an overseas publisher? Are you someone overseas purchasing it from an American, etc.? So you never know what those costs are. You also don't know, is someone buying it new? Are they buying it used? Are they trading for it? You never know. So I hate to just list prices for things or say if it's really expensive or not. I mean, maybe I'll mention prices a little bit, but definitely never exact. Well, in the case of this one, I can say that it's a modestly priced folio game, right? Like, it was not expensive. It's a folio game, so I bet it ships reasonably cheaply, even overseas. But you get 2 separate maps with very nice artwork, several dozen large, and we're talking 1-inch counters here, right? Like really large, really nice counters, decent thickness. They're very nice, with good artwork on there too. Again, I think great graphic design in the game overall. You get a bunch of cards, like you get, it's basically these 3 different types of cards. There's also reserve cards, but you get all these action cards, decent quality, get some artwork on there. It's cover art, very clear to read, nice and easy. You get all kinds of components here in a folio game for a modest price. So I definitely think you get your value with this one. Finally, for my pros, it's actually a really clever solitaire system. And you get it in only 7 pages of rules. And I don't think that's easy to do with a hex encounter game. But the designer, Jay Kirkpatrick, he succeeds here. Sure, you have to make the occasional choice for the Germans, but mostly you're performing actions based on the cards and the numbers on this chits here. So, although it isn't perfect, like I said before, I do think it's clever. I do think it works very well. And if you're okay with you know, 1 out of every 10 times you kind of have to maybe make a little bit of a judgment call yourself. You're definitely not just playing both sides. Trust me, the system is playing the Germans. You just may have to kind of nudge it in the right direction every now and then. I think that is a great achievement for what is basically a 7-page rule book. All right, those were my pros and cons. Let's go ahead and jump into my final thoughts. So if you saw my tutorial playthrough, if you watched it, you saw how excited I was at the end when I won. The game isn't easy, so the victory almost surprised me, yet my reaction showed how happy I was to win. If a game can generate that amount of emotional reaction, it must be doing something right. I really like this one. It's hard to find a solitaire tactical scale war game that is a true solitaire game. There are definitely other solitaire friendly tactical war games out there. Something like Lock and Load Tactical comes to mind. But that's also what I call a lifestyle game, right? That's the type of game you spend weeks learning and a lifetime playing. You know, you're picking up all those big box expansions and core games. The rule book is like 70 some pages. Now it is a good rule book. I don't need a horde of Lock and Load Tactical fans coming at me. Trust me, big fan of Lock and Load Publishing. Although I've never really gotten into Lock and Load Tactical myself. I did play a little bit on the computer. Actually, had a couple videos on my channel with the digital version. I like the system. You gotta admit, it's definitely more of that lifestyle game, right? You're gonna spend a lot of time learning it. You're gonna have a great experience with it, but it is not just a pick up and play. This is a pick up and play kind of game. Scream Aim Fire is a game with 7 pages of rules that you can learn in an evening. I mean, you're gonna read through the rule book. You're gonna get the game set up. You're going to start pushing around the counters, flipping cards, play for 2-3 turns, reset everything at the beginning. You're going to start. You're going to have the game, if not down, close to it. Comes with a nice player aid. Not everything's on it. You're going to have to refer back to the rulebook occasionally. But trust me, you play through a couple complete games, you got the game down pat. I can recommend this if you want a simple to learn, easy to play, solo tactical war game. And I'm excited to see where the game goes with additional scenarios for the base game and future games and expansions covering new theaters. I'm particularly interested to see how the system could handle the Pacific theater. I think it'd be a lot of fun to see, Marines, Japanese forces, and maybe a way to switch sides, right? So maybe a way where the system you can play for either side, right? Maybe something like that, a modification of the systems, because as is, you're playing just as the Americans and just, against the Germans handled by the AI system. So either way, really like this game. Definitely worth picking up. Solitaire, tactical scope, any of those things interest you. A nice, affordable folio from Time of Battle Publishing. Great job, Jay Kirkpatrick, and I can't wait to see what else he does in the future. So, hope you guys enjoyed this overview and review. If you played this game, if you're interested in picking it up now, or not interested, maybe something I said you're like, I don't know if that's for me. Please post below, comment below, let us know what you're thinking. Let us know if you pick up the game. I want to hear from you guys. But until next time, later everyone.